Number 1. The Gary Plashy Incident. It's the night of March 16th, 1984, and a man in a white cap and dark sunglasses is leaning against a bank of payphones inside the Baton Rouge airport in Louisiana. To everyone walking past, he looks like a tired traveler making a quick call before heading home. He has a phone receiver pressed to one ear, but what none of them can see is the loaded pistol tucked into his other hand. His name is Gary Plashy, and he did not come here to catch a flight. You see, Gary had a son named Jody, an 11-year-old kid who, like a lot of boys that age, was really into karate. His instructor was a 25-year-old man named Jeff Doucette, and Doucette wasn't some stranger. He taught 3 of the 4 Gary kids, he was welcomed into the family, and the community trusted him completely. Jody once described him in his school paper as basically everybody's best friend. On February 19th, 1984, Doucette told Jody's mother he was taking the boy for a short drive and would have him back in 15 minutes. Instead, he drove Jody roughly 2,000 miles across the country to a motel in Anaheim, California. There he had dyed the boy's hair to disguise him, passed him off as his own son, and continued abusing him. For days, Jody simply vanished. To the police, it looked like the pair had disappeared into thin air, and to Gary and June, it was the specific nightmare every parent quietly dreads. Doucette, though, wasn't nearly as careful as he thought. He'd left a trail of bad checks behind him, and the police were already closing in. The real break came when he made the mistake of letting Jody call his mother. The cops traced that single phone call to the Anaheim motel, and on March 1st, the boy was finally back home in Louisiana to his parents. Here is where most parents would exhale, but Gary couldn't. After Jody was returned, he reportedly felt overwhelmed by anger and distrust of the legal system, believing his son's abuser might not be punished severely. In an interview, he described not knowing how to even begin dealing with what had happened. He had no faith that the justice system was going to give Doucette anything close to what he believed he deserved. So when an employee at the local news station quietly tipped Gary off about exactly when Doucette would be walked back through the Baton Rouge airport to face trial, Gary made his decision to go to the terminal early, found the payphones, and waited. At around 9:30 that night, 2 deputies led a handcuffed Doucette through the concourse, and a news crew was filming the whole thing for the local broadcast. As Doucette passed within a few feet, Gary turned, raised the pistol, and fired a single hollow-point round into the side of his head. Doucette dropped instantly and died the next day. And because that camera was rolling, the whole country watched a father execute his son's abuser in real time. Now, legally, Gary was in enormous trouble. He was charged with second-degree murder and released on a $100,000 bond. But the public had already acquitted him. A local riverboat captain helped raise money for his defense. Strangers stopped him on the street, and when his lawyers negotiated the charge down to manslaughter, the case never even reached a jury. In August of 1985, the judge cited psychiatric testimony that Gary had been temporarily unable to tell right from wrong, and that Gary posed basically no risk of ever doing anything like this again. So instead of decades behind bars, Gary got a 7-year suspended sentence, 5 years of probation, and 300 hours of community service. Number 2. Jason Vukovich. It's the morning of June 24, 2016 in Anchorage, Alaska, and a 40-year-old man is walking up to a stranger's front door with a notebook clutched in his hand. Written inside that notebook are names paired with home addresses, and every single one of them belongs to a convicted sex offender. His name is Jason Vukovich, and he's about to go hunting. You see, Jason was born in Anchorage and adopted as a boy by a man named Larry Lee Fulton, and according to Jason, Fulton subjected him and his older brother to years of physical and sexual abuse throughout their childhood. That kind of damage doesn't stay in childhood. Years later, Jason's brother stood up in court and said that even after all the counseling, he was never going to get better. Jason himself grew up carrying what he described as a quiet certainty that he was worthless and spent his early adulthood drifting through several states, building a record of theft and drug charges before circling back to Alaska around 2008. By 2016, that old, unaddressed trauma had reached a breaking point, and Jason decided to point it at a target. And that target was Alaska's Public Sex Offender Registry, a state-run online list of people convicted of sex crimes, and by design it includes their names, their convictions, and their home addresses, so that communities can know who lives among them and stay safe. Jason took the list, which was built to protect people, and turned it into a hit list. He copied out the names and addresses of 3 men whose listed offenses ranged from possession of child pornography to attempted sexual abuse of a minor, and the day after getting out of jail on an unrelated matter, he set out. His first stop, on the morning of June 24th, was the home of 68-year-old Charles Albee. Jason forced his way inside, ordered Albee to sit on his bed, slapped him across the face several times, and coldly told him he knew who he was and what he had done. Then he robbed him and left. 2 days later, he showed up at the home of 25-year-old Andres Barbosa at 4 a.m, this time with 2 accomplices, threatened the man with a hammer, punched him, and robbed him as well. His third and final victim was 68-year-old Wesley Demarest. This one went much further. Jason struck Demarest in the head with the hammer 4 or 5 times, fracturing his skull and knocking him unconscious, and made off with the man's truck and laptop. To at least one of his victims, Jason introduced himself as an avenging angel for abused children, a title he'd given himself. Jason pleaded guilty, and at his sentencing in February of 2018, the judge delivered a line that functions as the moral of this entire video. Vigilantism is not something we accept in America. The men Jason attacked were complying with the law by being on that registry, and the registry existed to keep the community safe, not to hand out a map for private revenge. Jason received a 28-year sentence with 5 years suspended, leaving him 23 years to actually serve, though he'd be eligible to apply for parole after roughly 6. The prosecutor's argument was that whatever these men had done in their pasts, there was no excuse for a stranger to hunt down and beat them, and the registry was never meant to be a tool for people to carry out their own brand of justice. Number 3. The most ignored 911 call in America. It's the afternoon of November 14th, 2007 in Pasadena, Texas, and a 61-year-old retiree named Joe Horn is on the phone with the 911 dispatcher. Over the next several minutes, Joe is going to do the precise opposite of everything that dispatcher begs him to do, and by the end of the call, 2 men will be dead in his front yard. You see, Joe was in his house when he spotted 2 men breaking into the house next door. He watched them climb out of his neighbor's windows, carrying bags stuffed with stolen belongings. He then grabbed his 12-gauge shotgun and called the police. An important piece of context is that, just 2 months earlier, Texas had expanded a law commonly known as the Castle Doctrine. In plain terms, it was based on the idea that a person's home was their castle, and the expanded law had broadened the circumstances in which a Texan could legally use deadly force to protect their property. Joe knew about the law, and during the call, he brought it up directly, essentially arguing that he had the legal right to stop the men himself. Throughout the call, the dispatcher was horrified, pleaded with him not to go outside, and by one count, she told him to stay put around 14 times. She kept repeating a version of the same desperate warning. There was no property in the world worth shooting somebody over, and he was going to get himself killed. But Joe was not having it. At one point, he flatly told the dispatcher that he was going to kill them, and he was not making an abstract threat. He was narrating a decision he had already made. What Joe did not know was that a plainclothes police detective had already arrived at the scene in an unmarked car and was watching the entire incident unfold from behind the wheel. Joe stepped out of his house carrying the shotgun and confronted the 2 burglars, Diego Ortiz and Hernando Riascos Torres, both Colombian nationals who were in the country illegally. It later emerged that Torres had previously been deported in 1999 and had a prior conviction for dealing cocaine. Without hesitation, Joe fired at them. Both men went down, and he called 911 again. His voice was shaking as he insisted that he had been left with no choice because the men had entered his own front yard. The case detonated. It had every ingredient Americans argued about all at once: gun possession, self-defense, race, and immigration. And everyone had an opinion. The fact that the 2 men had been in the country illegally escalated the controversy. When police searched them, they found a patchwork of identification cards from several countries, and Torres, in particular, had a criminal history that made him an easy figure for Horn's supporters to point to. To one half of the country, Joe Horn was a stand-up citizen who had done what the police could not get there quickly enough to do. To the other half, he was a man who had left the safety of his own home to chase down and shoot 2 people over a neighbor's belongings while ignoring dispatcher's instructions. Horn testified before the grand jury for roughly an hour and a half, and the plainclothes detective who had watched the whole thing became a crucial witness to how it actually went down. On June 30th, 2008, a Harris County grand jury declined to indict Joe Horn on any charge, and the district attorney's message to the public was that the criminal justice system had worked exactly as it should. Joe walked away a free man. His case landed at the exact moment Texas was becoming a stand-your-ground state, and for years afterward, it stayed a reference point in the national argument over when exactly a person gets to decide that vigilantism is justified.